The CGI podcast is all about successful artists and designers sharing their personal stories and experiences to inspire you to take action. Learn from others and apply the shared wisdom to your own journey as you chase your creative potential. This is the CGI podcast. This is episode 6 with senior environment artist David Schultz. In this jam-packed episode, I picked David's brain on what advice he would give to an aspiring game artist. David breaks down a bunch of actionable steps that you can start working on today. Additionally, we discuss some of the intricacies of creating game-ready assets, as well as touching on the future of gaming as a whole. Before we start the interview, I want to remind you to take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Let's dive into episode 6 of the CGI podcast. David Schultz is a senior environment artist currently working at Red Storm Entertainment in the video game industry. As an environment artist, he brings to life the worlds we have grown to love. While creating props and environments, David uses a diverse set of tools to create diverse work. Over the past 9 years, he's worked on titles such as Eat Lead, Earth Defense Force, The Secret World, and Tom Clancy's The Division. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So, if you don't mind, as an environment artist, for any of our listeners who maybe have only heard the term thrown around loosely, would you mind giving us an idea of what your daily responsibilities might be at work?
It really varies. So as a prop artist, I make props. Like I did things like burn bodies. Where we have a lot of death in the Division. I did like burn bodies, like a lamppost, these cases, stuff like that, like things that you would find placed around the world. But then the other thing that I do in safe houses, which were basically they're just what they sound like, but in the dark zone, in the Division, we have these safe houses, and there are these interior spaces where you can go and sort of get out of danger briefly. So I was asked to do all the safe houses in the dark zone. It was cool. They're small. They're little contained interior spaces. So you get I could spend a little bit more time on them and make them more custom, because it's a place where people actually come and you won't be fighting anybody. So it's true, after you play the game a lot, you're basically just going in there looking at your inventory. But when you first go in there, the first few times, there's nothing else happening. You're just, looking at the space. So I got to spend a good bit of time on that. And I did that the 2 more for our latest round of DLC. So basically in that, I'm actually building out the whole space and then propping it, and which is just placing props and sort of telling a story, a visual story there.
What's cool is you touched on a lot of things that I have a lot of questions about that I think would be awesome to dive into, that you'll probably be able to explain a little bit more in depth. So admittedly, I personally am not somebody who has experience with modern video games. So I have played just a couple, honestly, a little bit on the Nintendo 64, however long ago that was. Right, I know, that's pretty laughable. And then 1 or 2 computer games. I want to say the most time I spent on a computer game was Fallout New Vegas. I think it was probably right when I graduated college. So it was quite a while ago, probably 5-6 years ago. So my experience here, other than what I've gleaned from online, is very little. So I'm going to have a lot of kind of stupid questions here, but
that's fine.
But that's what kind of makes this interesting. So so from what it sounds like you were talking about, when you talk about props, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are all the items that more or less, I don't want to use decorate in a bad way, but kind of in a very literal sense, kind of decorate or occupy the rooms or the spaces that are in the environment that you're playing with. They're things that maybe could, I I want to say at first glance might get overlooked because they seem to kind of become part of the environment. But I mean, that's also, I guess, makes sense as you are an environment artist. That's part of the world around your character. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's different. It's different every game company, but the or at least outside of the props thing, like as far as like who what you call different people and their roles. But prop artist is pretty and yeah, pretty universal. Even though we also call them environment artists. But yeah, it's basically there's sort of like it goes through processes, and for a long time there's just sort of like a shell, of a world, that you just and that's the focus for a long time. It's just how you move through that shell, that space. And then gradually over time, there's like hero props or props that are important for gameplay, so they dictate the way that people move through the space or interact with the space.
So if I can interrupt, like what would an example of that might be? Like
Um,
a hero prop specifically, if you had to come up with something.
so hero props can be like I didn't actually make this, but a coworker of mine made like a helicopter, and he made like a crashed version of it, and he made the helicopter. I'm No, yeah, I'm positive he did. Yeah, at the very beginning of the game, the helicopter that you ride in the game, like he made that piece. So that's
Okay, so it's a significant part of the story that you interact with.
yeah, it's a focal point. It's something that it's basically something that people uh, it's something that's going to take some time to make, and that people think is important enough to have a person or people, spending all that time to make it.
Got it.
Um,
Got it.
because yeah, nowadays, and this is true across the board, there's so much outsourcing, just because the worlds have gotten so big. Um, Most hero props will probably stay in house, uh, and they'll have specialists who work on them.
Sure, that makes absolute sense. Um, as far as so and I interrupted you earlier. You were on a roll when you were talking about kind of the um, I want to say the stages or the various groups or that are more or less involved in bringing a large modern day video game to life. I mean, from what I understand, I mean it's a huge process. The timelines, the budgets are very large on those AAA games, and are you able to kind of understood like I understand like each company's very different in the way they do things. In some cases are more proprietary. But are you able to kind of give a very generalized approach to like what those steps might be, kind of who comes in when, or how, like just kind of the order of operations?
Um, yeah, no, I think it's probably the same in most companies. Uh, I've heard of some companies, having uh, teams, I guess, that move through and do the different stages. And then others, it's like the same people who do, multiple stages. But I think regardless, you pretty much do it the same way, though. Um, and yeah, so it generally, you know, the longest part of game development is people figuring out what the game is and what's fun, and so for a lot of that, you don't need too much in terms of art. You don't really need that much, initially. In fact, you probably don't want it because it's just so much easier to prototype with like really simple geometry. Uh,
So are you talking like testing out the actual like gameplay and the flow of things, or are you talking more art direction and story, or is it a little bit of both?
I think it's not as much art direction at that point, I don't think, as it is gameplay, the actual like mechanics,
Okay.
and level design, just figuring out, like how 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 do we want people? Yeah, I mean, it sounds really, it's sort of, I guess it's sort of the same thing I said, but yeah, really it is just like, how do you want people to move through these spaces? How, if you're, in a jungle or something like that, and how many trees, how dense do we want it to be? How open do we need it to be? What spaces do we need to provide cover to, if it's something where people are climbing things, but it's how do we put these trees together so that they can climb through this, and what kind of architecture needs to be there to support that. But and when you're in the early stages, and really those stages can last for a while, it's just so much easier to make those changes on really simple geometry. It's like, oh no, we need this to be a little bit longer here. We need this to be, we need 10 of these, or we need 20 of these. It's just easier to just spit that stuff out if it's really simple. And then you probably have artists working in tandem on potentially separate areas, just sort of setting visual benchmarks, so that everybody can get excited. Because I feel like that's sort of it. I don't think that's just because I'm an artist. I feel like that's sort of what the art side of things does during that part, is getting people excited about how the game could potentially look.
Oh yeah.
And once you see those early benchmarks, I mean, I don't know, it's always exciting, it's fun, and then you got to figure out how to get it to run, and that's that's the rest of the game.
Wow.
It's just going from there and figuring out what you can and can't do, and generally there's a lot that you can't do, but if you work with good people, which I definitely have the good fortune of doing currently, of working with good people, you find out that there's a lot of cool stuff that you can do. So
That's really cool. So in the beginning, it sounds like they're kind of blocking things in with really basic kind of stand-in or just that, blocks of geometry, really, to assess how you play the video game. And then I can imagine that having the kind of key images, whether they're kind of renderings or whatever they are, of just like kind of each environment or level or various parts of the game, can kind of help get everyone ready for that next step of like, okay, let's bring this thing to life now.
yeah, and it helps the designers to start thinking about the space too. To see like what art is coming up with, for things that they could potentially place in these areas. If it's a cover game, like how are we going to be able to put vehicles together? How are we going to be able to put various other street level props together so that you can move through the space and have cover? Or if it's destruction, seeing how things destroy. I don't know. And it sparks, it works both ways.
Right. I mean, that's the beauty of the team, right? Everybody's getting inspired by each other, and they're kind of working back and forth, I would assume.
Yeah. That's my. I mean, honestly, that's my favorite thing about the game industry, is just working with other people, and somebody's always got a better idea, or a way to take things in a different direction or improve them, and it's always exciting.
Cool. Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, you go into work at the office, like actually on site each day, right? You're not doing like freelance work, right? So, I have to imagine at the facilities and everything like that, is it a pretty inspiring place to work?
Yeah, definitely. And this has been true everywhere I work, or I've worked, and I you sort of get, it's easy to get sort of stuck in your own, thing, what you've got to do,
Mm-hmm.
because you have your own deadlines and all that stuff. But um, the more open that you make yourself, though, and talking with other people, just just keeping up with emails, just doing, just seeing what else is going on, and just, taking part in as much as you can. It's yeah, it's definitely exciting. It just I mean, at all these studios, it's just crazy how many smart and talented people there are, and it's
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine. I mean, does and I should know this. I don't know, but where you work it's Red Storm, right?
yes.
So is it a fairly large company as far as headcount goes?
Yeah. I mean, well, yes, it is. There are larger companies, um, but I don't know exactly how, if we're like in the 150
Okay.
range, which is I mean, it's a good size. We might be more, gosh, um, but I know we're like a good mid-size company. There are other companies like I would imagine like Blizzard maybe, or some Riot. Like I think some of those companies are in the several hundreds.
Right, right. That
But
makes sense.
but Ubisoft, like we're part of Ubisoft, and so Ubisoft itself is very big. But
Oh, okay. So they're like the parent company. They own you guys as well as other
yes,
ventures.
yeah,
Okay.
yep.
Okay, cool, cool. So as far as your role in an environment artist, so I want to in a little bit get into kind of a little bit more about some of the technical things, some of the tools you use, how you do that, and everything. But if you don't mind, I mean, is this something that you always wanted to do when you were younger and you had a fairly direct path to this job, or was this something that you discovered later? I mean, I'm a little bit interested in how you ended up doing this.
No, no, it's not. I mean, I did, I always really liked video games, but we didn't actually have a TV until I was like 12, maybe.
Okay.
So I didn't grow up uh, uh, playing a lot of games. I played them at people's house, or on their, at the arcade or something like that. I mean, when I finally did get a Nintendo, and I definitely took a took a hard dive into games there for a while. Uh, but no, I mean, back then I definitely I didn't think. I mean, as a kid, it was like, oh, cool, it'd be cool to work in video games. I had no idea what that entailed, and I no, I went to college, and I went to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I studied French and philosophy. Um,
Wow, that's not what I would have guessed.
no, yeah, it's that's what I yeah, I wrote a thesis, like they call it like an honors thesis, and for my French degree, and I thought I wanted to go to school for that, and try and become a professor or something like that. But after I did that thesis, I just realized that I really missed art. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life uh, teaching, not and not that, and not writing the kind of things that I was writing. So yeah, and after that, it took a while actually to figure out what exactly it was that I wanted to do. I thought about all kinds of things, but I started drawing a lot again, and
And this was after your college experience,
yeah,
after
yeah,
you graduated?
yeah. After I graduated, I had a really good friend who he went to Bard College in New York, and he was a photography major, and I went and lived with him for a while, and he had all these friends who are artists, and I don't know. I didn't experience that in my college experience. Wasn't like that, and it was really cool to be around all these artists. And I don't know. It really motivated me to try and figure out a way to get back to being creative and doing something that was more. Not that being a professor and writing all that stuff isn't creative, but it's not creative in the way that I want it to be creative, I guess.
Well, right. And when you say like you didn't have that experience back at home, was it the like what was it? Was it like the passion between or maybe like was it the group of friends that you got to meet, or like what was the thing that kind of got you thinking about that?
It was just like I'd go out with them, to different. I'd go out on people's like photography shoots, his, other people's, and just like help them help them light things, help them,
Cool.
pick out, I don't know, whatever, like anything, just being around other people. I started studying, art history more on my own. I don't know, just trying to figure out where I fit into that. And it took a little while, but I got lucky. I met through a friend's, another friend's dad had a friend who was doing some sort of, and this was back in Asheville, North Carolina. He was doing commercial work, and he needed somebody to do storyboarding for him. And I had never done that before, and in fact, I am not good at that at all. But but I did it. I showed him a bunch of stuff, and I don't think he was very nice, but I think luckily though he agreed to teach me Lightwave.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, that's what he is. This was a while back. This was probably in like 2000. I think 2004 is when I first started.
Okay.
And so yeah, he agreed to teach me Lightwave and start teaching me how to model and stuff. And I helped him with a few different projects. I mean, we did all kinds of stuff, but I learned all kinds of weird things like what is it, match moving. Learned a bunch of stuff in After Effects. Video editing. I did all kinds of stuff back then. But that was really where it started, where it was just like, oh, I really like this. I don't know if I like doing this, but I really like, this side of things. I want to, and I don't know. I was sort of consumed.
That's great. I mean, how did how did that interaction go? I mean, so you were doing work for this guy, and how did it go from just like you're helping him with something, but then all of a sudden he's teaching you another thing? Like, how did that come to be? Like, because that's a fairly unique opportunity, and it's an interesting one.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure that I remember. Like, he, I mean, to be fair, and I don't. It's cool. It worked out for me too. Like, he, especially in the beginning, got basically free labor, to help him make some things,
Sure.
and in turn, I mean, I learned how to, how to model. I did eventually get paid on some things, but for a while there was a good bit of like, free labor where I was like, hey, I need to make this kitchen, and I mean, I remember the first things, it was just like, oh man, I was like, this is a huge mess. I do not know what I am doing. But yeah, I mean, I guess I got good enough fairly quickly to at least be able to give him some assets that we could render out,
Right. So you were actually, so he more or less wanted to see if you could help him just lighten his load and help him work with what he was already like doing. And so he showed you enough of the basics that you could help him create assets for him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That
So
makes sense.
I'd work with him and then I'd go home. Like I had a space, he had a little like office and I had a space in his office.
Okay.
And, yeah, I'd come in there. I mean, I back then, I mean, it was buying books, And so I like had my lightweight books with all the tutorials and stuff like that, and just, and then he'd help me like figure out things when I got stuck or whatever. And then after, I don't remember how long it was. I was working at least with or around him for a while. And so I don't remember exactly how long it was until like he actually was like, "Hey, can you make this for me?"
Got it.
But,
Yep.
But no, I was really, because it's funny, when I first got started, everything that I saw, I mean, this was a long time ago, 2004. I mean, everything that I saw was, I mean, it didn't really look that good, back then, like visually, I mean, nobody, I don't even think people were using global illumination back then.
Right.
And so it was just sort of like looking at it, it was sort of like, oh, I was like, I don't know, is this really what I want to do? It's like, I mean, it just doesn't, it looks so cartoony, and I really wasn't into like comics and cartoons and stuff that much. But I'm glad something about it, just like being able to like make things and render it out, light it, do all that stuff by myself. And I was hooked. It was awesome.
Well, yeah, it was obviously enough to plant that seed in which you saw, it's like, I mean, no one knows. I mean, I don't know. Sure, some people know, but like, it seems like a majority of us kind of, there's a lot of searching and that goes into finding that thing that you really can see yourself pouring a lot of time and energy into, especially when it comes to like a career type job or work. And, I think part of that, you can try to do it the right way and do your research and whatever, but, some of it's just comes straight out of, serendipity and just being, open to different opportunities, like, and kind of exploring. And it sounds like, you kind of had a lot of, you weren't quite sure what you were going to do after school once you had finished, but then you were open to opportunities, and something like this eventually grabbed your attention. And that seems like that was the start of it all, huh?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I know people who had similar situations, and I know the other side. People who just that all that stuff happened at an even earlier, stage. Because, well, that was the other thing, is that after all that happened, there was almost like a 2-year period there where I wasn't working for anybody, and I made that transition to where I decided I wanted to work for in video games, and that process was actually longer
Sure.
than the initial process. So,
but like, then were you like just doing whatever work you could to kind of pay bills, or were you,
yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
So
I did all kinds of stuff. I worked. I mean, I worked some construction. Like I worked at Duke for a little while, with a
okay.
professor there. And I considered going back to graduate school again, because I just was like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if I can do this. But I actually had another chance encounter with a friend of mine, and she put the work that I had been doing in front of somebody who worked at Epic Games, and he was nice enough to give me a very brutal but honest critique of my work. And
How'd that go?
it was really brutal. Like, it was, I mean, when I first read it, it was like, it was very deflating. You're just like,
Sure.
oh my God, wow, I'm so terrible. But I mean, it was great. He gave me basically a roadmap,
That's incredible. See, and that's the thing. Like, it takes a sense of optimism and maturity to recognize the value in that, which is awesome.
Yeah, once you get, done cursing them, then it's like, oh, okay, actually, you know what? He did me a favor. This is great. It's like, so I spent like 2 months, like, just solid, of just making all the changes, and just reworking everything and making some new stuff, and then I got a job. I got my first job. So
Wow. So at this point, so I mean that's crazy. That's cool that your friend did that for you. You had a small like portfolio at that point. Is that what she shared?
yeah, yeah. It was
And primarily light wave work, or
no, at that point, I was doing. I'm trying to remember. I was still using. Actually, I might have switched because I used Moto. I used a lot of things. I used Moto and Cinema 4D for a while.
okay.
But then once I started trying to go straight into video games, I everybody seemed to be using Macs, so
Hmm.
I tried to make that transition. So yeah, I was making all the stuff in Macs, and then trying. Uh, at that point, it was sort of hard to get game engines, and I know I had a version of Unreal,
Okay.
but honestly, like I got something imported into it, but it was so I couldn't figure it out, and that you couldn't watch like tutorials the way that you can now.
Hmm.
So I just rendered the stuff out in Max, and it looked terrible. I mean, it still does like rendering like real time assets out, like just doesn't look great. But back then it was like even worse, and it was done by like me at that skill level. It was terrible. But
But it was enough to get you a job.
yeah. Once I made all those changes, and I still had like the higher poly sort of
Hmm.
not game ready stuff.
Right, and that's something I definitely want to talk about a little bit later when we talk some technical stuff, if you don't mind.
Sure.
But at this point, like as far as your pathway, was that job actually at? Did you say it was at Epic? Was it?
No, it wasn't at Epic.
Oh,
The guy who gave me the feedback was from Epic.
oh,
Uh,
I see.
no, it was at Vicious Cycle Software, which they don't exist anymore. But
Okay.
it was actually when I got there, it was awesome. It was sort of like an up and coming studio. They had their own engine. They were working on a really cool title, um, and they had a lot of really talented people. I mean, yeah, like some of the people that I worked with there were like some of the most talented people I've worked with. Uh,
Incredible. Huh.
but yeah, and it was a great first job. It's just as is often the case in the video game industry, things changed, and uh, there was a bunch of stuff that happened with the first game that I worked with. So, and I won't go into all of it because I don't really know even like how much of it is public knowledge. But but basically, we had to make a full game in a very short period of time,
Got it.
and there are just some things that just aren't possible. Like it's just and you can't. It's just hard unless you just change scope. But if you're trying to make like a AAA type of game, you need a certain amount of time. You need a certain amount of people, and we just couldn't live up to that. But
And where was this location wise?
this was here. It was in Morrisville, North
Okay.
Carolina, which is sort of part of the what I guess is called like Raleigh Durham.
Right.
But yeah, it was a great experience though.
And how long were you on that for?
I was I was at Vicious Cycle for a while actually. I was there for like 5.5 years, I think.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah. Um, it it was a really good place to get started. And I mean, to be honest, I probably should have left earlier, but there were a number of things that happened, like family wise and stuff like that. I mean, that just sort of kept me there
Sure.
for longer. That's just unavoidable sometimes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So at that point, if so, 5.5 years in, like you at that point were like a professional working in the game industry. So at that point, Did you know kind of what you wanted your next move to be after that, or was that another kind of process of discovery?
Um, I, yeah, I did. I mean, well, I knew what I wanted, um, but based on the work that I had done, even though I had been, doing a lot of work on the side, on my own, as far as like my professional experience, um, like especially the last couple years that I was at Vicious, I mean, we worked on basically like kids games.
Okay.
I mean, they really looked good for what they were, but they were basically kids games, and they were games that used to make a lot of money, but with the rise of mobile games and stuff like that, they just didn't bring in that much money.
Interesting. Okay.
But also, so our industry really works in that like you can do all the side work on the side and stuff like that you want, and that's going to help you get like recognized. But it really comes down to like what kind of work you've done professionally, as far as like getting your next job. Or at least that's been my experience. So I didn't have. I wanted to do more like sort of like hard surface modeling. I really liked back then there was a lot of like ZBrush work that was going on, and I really liked doing that kind of stuff and did a lot of it in my spare time. But I didn't do that much of it professionally.
Okay.
So yeah, so it was sort of hard to make that transition. But
Basically, you needed to fill your portfolio with the type of work you wanted to be doing. Is that?
yes, yeah, and a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of places that will take a chance, but they basically, and I don't know how it works in like the film industry or other things, but like they make you do a test.
Got it. Like
And
an art test.
yeah, and it's generally like really grueling, short deadlines, and I mean, I had kids at the time. I have a wife,
Oh.
I just, I don't know. I never really understood the whole test thing. I
It's
don't
like a
know.
cultural thing, right? Like, I mean, it sounds like I mean, they choose to make it kind of brutal, right?
Yeah, I think uh, I completely understand why, like, and who knows? I mean, I may have just like fallen into that category at that point. I just didn't have the kind of experience that they wanted, so they just wanted to see what I could do. But but I just don't like the idea of it. I mean, like, I know. Well, I can't say. I'm opposed to it, because I don't
Sure.
think that people generally do the kind of work in their spare time, especially if they have a family, that they would do professionally. Like, I just don't think you get the same quality of work. And I've also seen a lot of people who did incredible tests, and then you get them on site and realize that there are a number of other problems.
Interesting. Okay.
It's like, wow,
So
okay,
it's not
you
always a
work.
great metric.
I don't think so. I mean, you know, I'm sure there are people out there who have tests that are very well tailored for what they want out of people, but most of the tests that I've taken, I just felt like it was like, if that's what you expected of me, that would be crazy. Like, that would be crazy. I wouldn't want to work at a place that expected me to do that and that,
Oh, sure.
you know. So, but anyways, all that to say, I what I ended up doing was through another friend, I got an offer to come to work at Funcom, and they had just moved to North Carolina, and were doing a DLC for their game that just came out, The Secret World.
Sorry, I got a quick question. What's DLC
Oh,
for?
sorry, downloadable content.
Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah, sorry.
So
Um,
does that mean like you download the game or like what is that content? It's like extra stuff?
Yeah, well, so basically, yeah. So the initial game comes out, and then after
Uh-huh.
that, and this is true for like pretty much every game now, um, then you try to extend the lifetime of the game by
Ah,
adding
totally.
in new content, adding new game modes, adding new maps.
And it's a source of revenue as well, I would assume. It's a bit of lifeblood.
Yep, yeah. So
Okay.
you try and extend out the life
Mm-hmm.
of the game, to sort of like, I mean, I think to help cover the cost, the initial cost of the game, and then also to, I guess, potentially help cover the cost of moving into the next game.
Well, right. And I was talking with a roommate of mine a while ago about that because, again, this is stuff I know very little about, but I was asking him about it because he was like, oh, there's new maps available in new XYZ. And I was like, well, this is interesting. So, like, back the only games I have for reference, it's like you might have dropped 30 or $60 on a game initially, but it seems like over the course of a life of a game now, they're maybe squeezing 120, couple $100 out of each person over the course of a year or two of gameplay. Is that more accurate?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, I don't know. I have no, no, I don't speak for Ubisoft or anything like that, but it's in my opinion, it seems like, the being able to get the amount of game that you get for $60 is kind of crazy.
Huh?
Yeah, I mean, the number of hours that people put into a game, into most games, for that $60. I mean, you can't do anything else for that kind of value. So, and who knows? I'm sure there are plenty of reasons why they don't go above that 60. Yeah, but I think by adding in all this other stuff, it helps them. I mean, they do actually extend out the game by quite a bit, by adding in different maps and all this stuff, and it's a lot of work. But I guess maybe it helps get it closer to like what it probably really should cost.
That makes sense. That does make sense, though.
To me, I mean, it's just, I mean, it costs, I mean, like to go see a movie at like a nicer theater, I mean, it cost me like $15.
Yeah, at least where I'm at. Yep.
Yeah, like so for like two hours, maybe an hour and a half, So it's pretty amazing, like what you get for what you pay. But
when you're talking about like total gameplay and things like that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, and some people, I mean, but I think it'd be interesting to see like averages for like a lot of the longer games, more open world games, like how many hours the average person puts in. But yeah, but so that's a way to extend out the life of the game. And with the Secret World, I mean, we did a ton of new content, and that was really cool. I'd never worked on a MMO, which is a massive multiplayer online game.
Which is what would you say that's what a lot of the more popular ones now are taking the form of?
I think they're moving that way. It's
Okay.
not. It's taking the old, like, there's been so much of that, which I actually think is cool. Like taking the old game modes and figuring out how to make them bring in the social element, and the all the crafting and customization part that of MMOs and RPGs and stuff like that, so that you can. I mean, it adds depth to the game, but it also keeps people playing the games for longer.
Sure.
And goes back to that same thing. But
and this was at was it Funcom or Funcon? What did you say?
Funcom, yeah,
Funcom. Okay.
They're a Norwegian company, but they have a studio in Durham, which is where I live. So
crazy. Okay. So that was the next venture after your first Vicious Cycle.
Yeah. And then from there, I got I mean, it's sort of a funny thing, but it goes to show how, like, reaching out to people, which I've been trying to get better at doing. But I just happened to look at the environment lead's profile on LinkedIn. Like, he showed up in my little, like, people you may know sort of thing.
Yep.
and I was like, oh, I don't think I know him, and I clicked on his profile, and I guess it just happened to be that they were looking for somebody, and so that showed up, that I had looked at his stuff, and then he reached out to me, and I just was finishing up, excuse me, the ZBrush beta for ZBrush 4R7. So I had all this other stuff that I hadn't shown that I had done for the beta to send to them, along with whatever other work I had done. And yeah, it was enough to get me an interview there, and I've been there now for about 2.5 years.
Cool. So that was really, and so a couple of key things there. One, because you were proactively looking to see what may exist out there, you were lucky enough that he followed up and got in touch with you, and B, you had, it sounds like by then you had a lot of work that you mentioned earlier might have been missing from your portfolio, stuff that you were particularly interested in, some hard surface stuff. Like what I can see online, it looks like quite intricate, kind of industrial and maybe sci-fi inspired type stuff. Is that right?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, it's that's pretty much it. Yeah, at that point, I'd also made like a little bit of a switch, I guess, like right before I got into the ZBrush beta. I had, I don't know, I had sort of just been sort of working on like whatever. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't really have a direction, I guess.
You were just like extra hands for all the tasks that needed, like anything that needed to be done on the game type deal, or?
Well, not so much that, like in my personal work, like
I see.
I always did things outside of work. I don't know, like I first started it when I thought that Vicious Cycle was gonna go under, and because there was a period where things were really unstable, and I was like, whoa, I need to start working on my own stuff. I need to have something to differentiate myself, and but I sort of just, I don't know, just like I was like almost like just like picking something. Was like, that'd be cool, I'll make that, and I just didn't really have any real focus. But at some point, while I was at Funcom, it was sort of like the beginning. I think it was like maybe even when like Vitaly Bulgarov first put out those like Mecha Day things, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it was exactly that, but it was around that time period.
Oh, okay.
Where there was somebody, like I started seeing more people doing like 3D sort of concept, as concept. And
probably just more people posting that at that point too, like with the social networks and everything like that.
Yeah, no, I mean, even my, my Facebook feed now, or like Twitter or whatever, I mean, it's just full of art.
Right.
I think that was definitely around the time that started becoming a thing, and then of course now with ArtStation. But yeah, for me, I guess I just realized that up to that point I had just been sort of learning a craft.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a I mean you're always learning the craft, but I feel like there's a good stretch of time where that's really what most of your brain power when you're doing this kind of stuff is going to, is like learning all these the ways that all these programs work, the way, how do you do this, how do you do that, and you get so caught up in the process that, at least for me, like I sort of forgot about the art side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just like, oh yeah, I got into this because like I thought I was like creative, like I thought I'd make new things, and like all I'm doing is like replicating things, and I don't, like, I'm not saying that in a judgmental way, like to people who do that. I think and I do that too. It's just like there's definitely a pleasure or a joy in like trying to make something look, the way that it actually does. But I also wanted to like start to try to, I don't know, make my own things a little bit. And I still think like I'm like, not, I'm not there. Like a lot of, I don't think my, you know, I don't think I've pushed myself far enough in that direction, but that was sort of the beginning of that process.
Well, and that's the beauty of that is like, I mean, of course, as we get better, we're always going to have that gut feeling of like, yeah, not there yet. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet, or whatever it is. Like there can always be more or better, or, And I think that what you brought up is really good and interesting, and that's that bit at like those years you spent. I think I like to think of that as like you were becoming a technician, like you were learning the technical way to use those tools, and that these days with this incredible software, that's a huge investment. Like, I thought that going to college would like teach me all the tools I needed. Like, little did I know it was like just an introduction. Like, I became aware of what existed in college. Like, and even then, that's a stretch. But like,
Right.
now it's like, yeah, you have to put in those years to become the technician. And once you have those skills, then you can let your creativity start bleeding into the program, I guess.
Yeah, it's like learning a language. I mean, that's sort of the way that I look at it. And so it's like, it takes a while to learn the language. And maybe in the beginning you start telling your own stories, but your command of the language just still isn't that strong. And so it's not until later, when you really feel like you've deepened that vocabulary and you understand the syntax, you understand how this stuff goes together, then it starts. Like, I mean, even though I still spend a lot of time, trying to figure out new programs, I feel like for the most part, most programs that I get into, with some exceptions, it doesn't take me that long to figure it out, like because I've done so much with the other programs, that it doesn't. And if it does take me too long, then I'm just like, wow, I just don't think this is the program for me. I just can't. This is too much work. I'm fighting with this interface way too much, or whatever. But yeah, so that's for me the last couple of years. That's been the big push.
Cool. Yeah. And if I can, I have a couple questions here. So like, because you were talking about, I mean, as far as tools and programs go, and I missed. Can you remind me again of the first one that you got kind of introduced to? What was that called again?
Oh, Lightwave.
Lightwave. That's right. It just came into my mind. And so with that, like the list that I had prior to us speaking is that like tools that you use: Lightwave, 3ds Max, Modo, Fusion 360, ZBrush, Marvelous Designer, Substance Painter, Substance Designer, KeyShot, Photoshop. Like, that's a fairly long list. Like, yes, there's some that usually people kind of pick one or two and kind of hunker down with, but like, and I'm assuming you probably touch and use quite more than that. That's just what I gleaned from your ArtStation page. I mean, you're quite, I don't know, you have a pretty wide and deep toolbox, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, I like, I like constantly looking at new programs, just trying to figure out new, better ways to do things. If I find myself, and I know I'm not alone in this, but it's just, I think that's part of it. Like, once you get comfortable, with a workflow or start, if you're aware of yourself while you're working, you start to realize that there are certain things like, wow, it takes me way too long to do this, and it's like, there's got to be a better way to do this. What is that? And, it might take a little while, and some things like I just haven't figured out, but, it's like, well, I don't know, maybe it just has to be this painful. But for me, like a lot of, I have found different ways, to use different programs, and I know a lot of people do this, where it's just like, okay, this program does this one thing really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm only going to use it for this one thing, but for that one thing, it's awesome. And you know, now it's, for the most part, it's pretty easy to get things in and out, programs, other than some scale things. Um, and especially if you're working at a bigger company, where they have all the software, it's just like, wow, why not? I don't know. Why not?
Right. So part of that is like you do personally enjoy learning new tools. Is that right?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And I
And
know a lot of people don't, but,
well, yeah, it can feel incredibly daunting. I mean, I think I'm somewhere in the middle, but I felt that feeling of dread when I got frustrated with the program. Like, great, I don't even know how to navigate the viewport. I hate this, or whatever.
right. Yes. No, I
But
think
you find that like the more you do, like you get better and quicker at each one.
yeah, for the most part. There have been a few exceptions. Like when I first started using Fusion 360, I was terrible with it. Like
Oh my word,
just
that's.
didn't understand that program.
But that sounds like it's because you were coming from a primarily like poly heavy workflow, and any CAD is probably quite new for you as like a way to go about that.
yeah, no, I mean it was completely, like a order of operations thing. Like I just didn't get it. I just kept like digging myself into these huge holes. And I was like, well, maybe it's just around the corner. And it's like, nope. I'm even further. It's like, oh God, this is terrible. But yeah, that program made me feel really stupid, actually.
That's ironic because that's usually the one that people feel okay with. I gotta say, coming from the other side of the fence.
Yeah, no, I've heard that. I heard a lot of people say that. I don't know what it was. It just like there were certain things that I could do in that program immediately, that it was like, wow, this is cool. But when it came to actually trying to make a whole thing that was more complicated, I just,
yes.
And it still actually happens to me in that program, but now I've figured out enough to where it's like, okay, I'm not going to do this in Fusion. I'm going to do this.
Right.
But yeah, I beat I people at work, I know, like for a while there, like kept hearing me just like, that program is so stupid. I hate it. I'm just like, I'm never touching it again. And then, I'd be like, well, what are you doing? Are you back in Fusion? I was like, yeah. Like,
they could tell just by the tone of your voice.
Well, it's just like, I was like, I don't like to let things like beat me, I guess,
Yeah.
And then, so it's like, maybe I wasn't thinking about it the right way. Maybe I wasn't coming out the right way. Maybe I need to do this. And then there's some programs, they just try like, I played around with Houdini some lately, and it's just like, there are things about that program that are really cool. No, actually it's a cool program. I'm not saying that. There are things for me about that program that are cool, but every tutorial I've gone through has ended up in scripting of some sort, And
sure.
And I'm just like, I can't do this. Like, I can follow you, but there's no way I can't.
Sure.
I would have to dedicate so much time to learning how to script.
Another language.
Yeah. And it's like, do I really want? No, it's like that doesn't actually serve the purpose that I really want right now. So
interesting. Okay.
That was one that I'm not saying I'm giving up on it completely, but for the time being, I still like to use their terrain stuff. But some of the other stuff I was trying to do, I might forego.
Cool. That makes sense. Who knows? Maybe in time I'll talk to you again and you'll be like, oh yeah, now I'm on to something else. But
yes.
Well, cool. Now that we've kind of like, come kind of full circle, like I kind of understand your journey and everything. I have kind of just a number of kind of random questions that you can answer as kind of like shorter, or as in depth as you want to. But so again, for the uninitiated, I know a little bit, but again, I'm hoping and thinking there may be people listening here who just haven't been around long enough to kind of understand the different areas and how they differ. So like, so how does modeling for video games? What are the big ways modeling for video games differs from creating 3D for other purposes, whether it's like someone who's in industrial design or something else?
So, well, video games has changed a lot. Like within the last, this generation of consoles, we
You're
can,
talking like the current ones that the last 3-4 years.
yeah, the last, yeah, maybe it has been like 3 years now, but yeah, the PS4 and the Xbox One, and then with the next, the pro versions of those consoles, we're able to, excuse me, put so much more geometry into models.
Okay.
So it has opened up a lot. It is more, it's not as restrictive as it used to be, but it's still, we still have to bake down high poly models to low poly models in a lot of cases.
So for someone who again doesn't know that terminology, are you able to kind of explain kind of
Yeah.
in like super dummy like layman's terms, like what are you trying to accomplish with that? Like what are the limitations of video games versus just straight up concept art?
So yeah. So um, and truthfully, because we can have so much more geometry, uh, we don't bake down. At least, well, I've seen this in a number of games that don't bake as much as they used to,
Okay.
because they can put more geometry, to show holes, or like bolts or cuts into things that they wouldn't have used to have put into the actual level geometry or the prop geometry. Um, but but still, for a lot of like more detailed props, um, you make a higher poly version that's like has all the details, um, that you've either sculpted in or you've modeled in, um, and you make a lower poly in-game version, um, that you bake the high poly information through a baker, whether it's a marmoset, tool bag, or uh, X normal. There's several out there, hand plane, and you bake that high poly geometry information onto the low poly via a normal map, or a displacement map, but I think it's generally a normal map. And that just does some like trickery, basically, where it looks, for the most part, as if it had all that detail on the low poly model. And it's just a way of keeping things cheaper in terms of geometry. When you have a whole bunch of stuff in a scene, it's just a way of keeping things cheaper. Although things have started changing, I think, in a lot of ways. So having all those textures has started becoming a thing where it's almost cheaper to have the geometry, but it's still a common practice. It hasn't gone away yet.
That's
But
really interesting. So as I gather now, basically you're saying a lot of the work, you're creating one thing very detailed, and then you're creating a much less detailed object, and then you're using normal maps to trick the camera so the low poly geometry all of a sudden looks much more detailed than it truly is. And that's to meet the budgets that you guys have set for poly counts and levels and stuff like that. And
yep.
but then now, as you said, things are kind of on their way to changing. You say it can be in some cases maybe even cheaper to start using different textures and stuff like that and actual pieces of geometry. Would that be the case because you're cutting out the manual process of creating both your high and low poly versions, and then doing all your baking and applying all your maps and stuff like that? Or
Yeah, it's because of so it's yeah. There's both the time thing, but then also it's the actual budgets for the levels themselves, in terms of like how many, in terms of texture memory that can be loaded. So I mean, those texture memory budgets have gone way up,
Sure.
there's also a lot more assets in a level than there used to be. So some of a lot of the ways, like I know for GDC, there was a talk that Epic did for their characters where they showed how, and there are other talks, other things out there showing similar workflows. Now for that, they did have a baked out normal map for their characters, but they were basically showing how they were using masks to blend between tiling textures, and I think that's become like a very common practice in the environment world. So we do a lot more where there's actually like more geometry there, and you're just using various masks to blend between tiling textures to create like levels of complexity instead of having unique albedos and
Sure.
speculars and stuff like that. And that way, if you're using those textures on multiple assets, then it makes all the texture budget cheaper.
Interesting.
And so I think that's become more common practice. And because those masks can generally be lower resolution and can also be shared, and then it becomes like a UV mapping game where you're like, trying to figure out how to use those masks and tiling textures and stuff like that. But it's actually, I think it's a pretty cool process. But
Nice. Okay. So when you're now, how much of this process are you involved in when you're creating game assets? Like, would you say a majority of the, say, the more recent, maybe the past couple of years worth of work, mostly props at this point?
Oh, for me, it depends.
Okay.
It's definitely been a mix. And another big part of being a prop artist, or at least in my experience, I don't know if it's like this everywhere, but is dealing with. It's not just making the props; it's going through and making all the props fit, the regulations, fit the rules. Like there's a lot of that technical part of just getting all the collisions right, getting things optimized the right way, making sure that they have the proper UVs. There's a lot of that stuff that goes into the game making part of being an artist.
So your responsibilities go a lot further than just the intellectual property or the design or the shape of the thing, modeling it. You're doing a lot more in order to make it work within the game and the game engine and everything else. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's not just my assets. Like it's everybody's. Like
sure.
That's
right.
generally. I mean, and that's been true everywhere I've worked. Where you just at some point, especially if you have a lot of outsourcing too.
Sure. Right. And I mean, are you also creating and building some assets that are like, do you ever get directions or blueprints from other artists or other departments that you then have to bring to life, or are you actually doing that work yourself?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I can really go into that like in specifics, but
Sure.
I mean,
That's fine.
yeah, no, I'm trying to think of how to, there, yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Not a problem.
Yeah.
On another note then, like what do you prefer? I shouldn't say prefer. Like what are you most excited to do? Like what out of all the like random tasks or chores or bits of work that you might be assigned at work, like what do you currently enjoy doing the most?
Hmm.
Is there anything that actually like stands out there?
Well, I mean, I've always really liked modeling, but I I it's funny. I really, and this has always been true. It's just it's the part of like once you actually start baking everything out and then putting it putting the textures on it, seeing the materials, like actually start to see it, come come into being, sort of, that I really like. Yeah, I really like modeling. I really like texturing. Substance Painter is, really uh, really changed a lot of things on the painting side of things. And it's a lot of fun.
So again, for people who aren't maybe familiar with that tool, would you go so far as to say it's a tool that helps you create a number of textures that render engines can use, but it gives you things like the freedom of like Photoshop when it comes to being able to kind of paint, or am I missing the mark? Is there,
Yeah.
how else would you describe it? I mean, because there's a lot to it in there. Like you can view your stuff in like a physically based environment, right?
Yeah, you can. I think the best thing, I mean, it is missing some things that, like, that you can do in Photoshop. I mean, they're improving it all the time.
Sure.
But there's still some deficiencies to the program. But I think the biggest thing is the whole smart material system that they have set up. So basically, I can set up a material with all these different types of dirts that use input maps to drive where that dirt is positioned.
Okay.
And those input maps, are like things like it can be your normal map, your ambient occlusion map, the curvature map, world normal map, and so on and so forth. And you can go in there and tweak all the settings on a generator, which is what they call their dirt mask, I guess, setup. You can create these generators and go in and tweak all this stuff and create these complex stacks, of like a dirty, scratched metal.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I do that once and I can save that out, and anything else that I bring in, I can just drag that onto it.
So it doesn't matter. It's not like you're painting a JPEG texture that only made sense on that surface. It's actually going to procedurally be applied to kind of any geometry and work well.
Yeah. So the thing that doesn't, so like any strokes that you paint. So
Sure.
when you paint in the masks, or paint directly on the textures or whatever, that stuff will not translate. But
Sure.
it's still taking. I mean, I tell you a number of times where I had to make 5 or 6 different things that were basically the same texture setup, the same materials, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And in the old way of doing things, it would have taken me forever to do it. But once I did that initial setup, and that initial setup takes up can take a little bit more time. But I was able to just fly through the other ones because it was just like, okay, I know exactly what I need to paint in my mask. I do have to do that over again, but it was like, it's very easy. No, it's a great tool. They've done so much. I mean, when it first came out, I thought it was terrible. I was like, "This is a horrible program. I shouldn't have bought it." And and then I kept seeing some new things from them, and I was like, "Well, okay, it was the beginning. Maybe it's okay." And then I did my first like project on my own a few years back, and it was just like, "Oh, okay, this is really cool, actually." And then once they came out with the smart materials thing, it was just like, "Oh, man, this is incredible. This is a whole new world." So.
And would you say that their niche is really video game specific? Like that seems to be mostly where I see it, but like, what would you say?
They've been branching out. I know I just saw they did a press release for like the new Assassin's Creed showing
Oh, okay.
how they were using Designer and Painter for Assassin's Creed. I think there are some things that it doesn't have. That film companies will definitely, or film studios would definitely want. And I don't know if it's going to be like I've never actually used Mari, but
Oh, okay.
I know there are a number of things that are in Mari that Painter doesn't have. So I don't know if it's like a Mari, that it's gonna like kill Mari or whatever,
Hmm.
but it's just, but the things that it does really well. And I suppose if you are using Mari and you have like people to set up all those shaders for you, and you have all that support, then Mari can be a really powerful tool. But like out of the box, it doesn't have what Painter has, in terms of being able to quickly create dirts and dirt shaders and all that sort of stuff. But
That's cool.
or at least that's from what I've seen. But
Cool.
yeah.
Well, so earlier when you were talking about the you were talking about kind of how the last generation of console has been starting to change things, and I'm assuming that's purely just due to the capability of the hardware. Like you could just throw more at it, you have more freedom. Obviously, that's an upward trend. The power of computers that your everyday consumer now has, either in their pocket or on their desk, or in their bag, they're going up like crazy too. So I would assume the same thing for game engines. But I don't know. Where do you think video games or that aspect of the entertainment industry? Maybe it's not going to be called video games, but where do you see things going? Kind of. What are some of the next big steps you think that will change the industry that you've been part of for a while now?
Oh man, there are a number of things. It's funny. I was just talking to a few different people at work about this. There's a talk that a a guy from Naughty Dog, he's the lead technical artist, Andrew Maximov, I think is his name,
Okay.
and he did a talk at GDC on the future of art production. And I was lucky enough to go to GDC this year, and saw the talk. And although I think it's accessible to other people now, but but he was just talking about like some of the trends and stuff like that, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot. Uh, yeah, I think, I mean, already the game industry has changed so much since when I first started, but I think in like another 10 years, I I don't I don't know exactly how it's going to happen, of course, but I do think there are going to be some really radical shifts. I think that virtual reality is going to be definitely a big part of it. I'll be interested to see. I just saw that, and I don't know, Neil
Blomkamp?
Blomkamp. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. Every time I say that, I feel like I'm saying it wrong. It just sounds so weird coming out of my mouth. But I saw that he was going to be potentially releasing some short films through Steam.
Oh, crazy. Cool.
Yeah, he wanted to do some like experiments and like sort of like maybe even like pitches. Um, and these aren't games, but I think there's going to be a lot of room for sort of like VR experiences, that could be like
Mm-hmm.
sort of interactive to some level. So it'd still have that game thing, but also be some, like a blur between
Sure.
film and games. And I think I feel like that's gonna happen. And I don't know if it's just going to be in VR, but just real time engines are getting better and better, and you know, uh, I, I have to believe that that's going to continue. And at some point, I mean, I even saw, there was another GDC talk where John Knoll was showing off that they used Unreal Engine in some of the final production shots for Rogue One,
Okay.
and he was showing like side by side comparisons of Unreal and RenderMan, and I mean, you could barely tell the difference.
That's
Uh,
incredible.
yeah, yeah. So I think there's going to be, more and more blending. I don't know. Uh, I'm also curious. The other side of what the talk that I mentioned before was talking about was just sort of like what it means for us as artists, because
Mm-hmm.
as things get more and more automated and get easier to do, and as we start using more scan data, just what it's going to mean to us as artists. And I think it's I don't want to be like all, sort of doom and gloom, because I really, I don't, it doesn't have to be that way. I'm not saying that it's going to be that way, but whenever you look, whenever things changes can be a scary thing, and so there's always people like, when you look at things that are coming, who have an immediate sort of fearful response, and I don't want to be that way. But it's just from the way that games have been made to the future, it looks like there will be a lot less of the sort of craftsman sort of element that has existed in video games. Where we just sort of got to like make stuff up, and hand paint all your textures, and lighting wasn't that accurate, shaders weren't that accurate, so it's just there was a lot more open to interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's going away, but it looks like it could be going away. I mean, there will always be stylization, but I don't know, that side of things, and then just the general trend towards outsourcing. I know the film industry has already gone through all of this.
Mm-hmm.
But as a games artist, it'll just be interesting to see where that goes. I do think it's going to be very different. I don't know that it's going to be bad, and I hope that it's not. And I'm not saying bad. I mean bad for like whenever you start taking away things from people, it's just
Sure.
you're like, oh, but I really like doing that.
Yeah,
And
it makes them uncomfortable.
yeah, exactly. I mean, then you could be like, yeah, but now you get to do this, and I don't know
Sure.
what that thing is going to be. It could be that it's like, oh, actually, that's pretty cool. All right,
Don't crank that widget. You're gonna go crank this widget over here.
right,
I mean, no, not to make it diminish it at all, but like, yes, there's probably gonna be things that we just don't know yet, because they have not been built out. There will become roles that don't exist yet, of course.
yeah.
Have you what's your personal? Have you had much experience with VR, like personally?
No, I mean, I've seen our studio has already. I think we've already made. Is it just one game? I guess we've already made one game, and then we have another game that's coming out. And I have not personally worked on those games, but I've seen a lot of things, and having the headsets there and messing around with them. I still have a hard time with them because I mean I get motion sickness sort of easily, so
Mm-hmm.
they're
Yeah.
a little nauseating for me. But I can still see the potential. I mean, even for like something like dumb like the Google Glass or whatever it is, or cardboard. What is it called? I can't remember.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I have that thing. I mean, it's like, but at least for me, it was only cool for like 15 minutes. But
Right.
for like 15 minutes, and like I was showing it to my kids, and like the sensation of like jumping off this cliff and all this stuff, and it's like, wow, that's incredible. Like that's crazy. It's so simple. This is so simple. It's like this is just the beginning. Like if this is moving in any way, which it was, even if it's only for 15 minutes, it's like that's amazing. I mean, it's going to be as those things are able to push more on the visual side of things, and the memory side of things, and then as they do more to reduce latency, to decrease the weight of the actual headsets. I mean, yeah, it is really weird to go into a room full of people who are testing VR.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because you see all these
I
people
can
with like a
imagine.
mask. Yeah, and it's like, oh, this is a scary glimpse into the future. But but it is incredible though. And I know that that's going to be. Uh, I feel very strongly that's going to become a thing like that in
Sure.
some form. Um, that's going to become a thing, um, and when it does, I mean, it's going to. I mean, it's going to be pretty exciting. So.
Cool. Well, it's good to know that somebody who's working in the industry has that optimistic outlook on it. That's always good to hear. There's enough doom and gloom in other areas. Um, so to kind of before we wrap up here, I just wanted to touch on kind of the big thing I wanted to get at here, which is you are a senior environment artist. You work on props, you work on environments. It sounds like you've touched a lot of different aspects of the assets that you guys produce. If you were to be giving advice to whether it was a younger version of yourself or maybe it's a different person, but someone who's listening today, and they're interested in doing what you do, what type of advice would you give them? Let's say if they are not currently in a similar industry, but they're working, some totally different kind of to pay the bills service job, and they want to make that switch. What type of advice would you give if you could?
Um, yeah, no, that's cool. Well, first I would say, I mean, like one of the things I always tell people is to start small. You know, everybody gets really excited when they start out, doing stuff, and they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna build out this huge thing, and it's gonna be so complicated and crazy," and and then it just fails miserably. And um, that's always my recommendation. Just start with something really small. Like make that thing really good. Like keep making small things until you make those small things really good, and then go from there and make something a little bit bigger, and then uh, don't even if you manage to make it, you're going to make so many mistakes. I don't know. It's just better, I think, early on to be able to make things more quickly. Um, that's something I wish I had done. Start out small, like trying to make things more quickly. Like you can figure out what you did wrong and fix it more quickly. Instead of having to spend a lot of time fixing a whole bunch of little stupid mistakes that you made over an entire level or something like that,
Sure.
So that would be one thing. I think yeah, it's so tricky because I also, I mean, I'm always surprised by like how little people look at other people's work. Um, I don't know. I do like various like like talks and critiques and stuff like that, and I'm just always surprised. Like I mean, for a generation that's so online, that it's just like they don't know who like any of the other people are. Like when I mention like, oh, this guy's work, oh yeah, you should look at this guy, and they've never heard of like any of these people. And I mean, I get it if you're like bad with names, but it's like genuinely like they just don't look at like who's out there, who's doing good work. It's shocking to me, but I've seen so many people, and yeah, don't do that. Like, just go engage. It's so easy. It's so easy now. And even if it's not, you're not comfortable like talking to people, that is another thing. Like, because the some of the things that have happened to me, as I've said, were because I went and talked to that person. I did this, and I wish I had done it more. Honestly, I think, I mean, I don't really like doing that. Like, I feel, uncomfortable, like asking people for help, or advice or like, and, and so I get that, but, you got to get over it. Um, I wish I had done more of that earlier. And even today still, like, I still have to get prodding from like people to be like, why don't you just go ask that guy? I'm like, oh, you don't think he'll think I'm a jerk for asking him how he did, blah, blah. It's like, no, that's just what the internet is. People ask people. And if he doesn't want to, he won't. You know, it's like, oh, yeah, okay, you're right. He still won't know who I am, so it won't matter. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like a personal offense to him.
Totally.
I mean, as long as you're not rude. Um, but yeah, so that's a big thing, reaching out to people, being engaged. Don't get too comfortable either. That's another thing that I see a lot of people who are like, starting out. They've like developed this workflow, even though they're not really that good, and they don't seem to be open to other things, like doing things other ways. Like that's a really poor way to like start out.
Yep. I spent my 6 weeks. I know everything I need to know. Now give me a job.
No, I mean, like it's crazy. I mean, like I've had people like argue with me about stuff where it was just like, what?
Oh my!
I was like, no, come on, like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I'm really, yeah, I'm really not that way. Like, even if I've had people say things to me and my initial reaction was like, no, that's dumb. That will never work. And then like I think about it, and then like later it's like, oh wait, that's actually really good. And I have to go back and tell them, I was like, I'm really sorry. It's like, you were right. That was it. That's actually a really good way to do that. Yeah. So, and I sort of like, guess that ties into the other thing, but just staying open, being hungry. I mean, if it's what you really want to do, if you really love it, which I really feel like this industry requires a lot of that passion and that desire.
Yep. If and I don't want to interrupt if you had other points, but
no. Sorry, I'm rambling.
You're not. I'm taking great notes because these are going to be people are going to want to hear this stuff, and I like to kind of point out some of the highlights in the show notes, but two things come to mind, and I think these are probably like standard questions that I feel like I've heard a million times. It doesn't even matter on the industry, but these are the questions that get repeated. But of course, you're the professional here, so I'm going to throw them right at you. First and foremost, how do you answer the question that people ask, like when they say like, what software package should I learn? Or what should I learn first? Or what one's the best? Like, you've heard that a million times.
Yeah.
How do you answer that as a professional who uses many tools, has learned them, but like that kid is just at this point paralyzed by the fact that there seem to be too many options?
Right. So what I say is, and it's sort of like a two-part thing, but like, figure out where you want to work, like what kind of stuff you want to do, and then go onto LinkedIn, go onto now you can see on ArtStation. Go find the people who work at those places that you want to work. See what softwares they use, and just learn those softwares. I mean, generally it's either Max or Maya, and I think if you can do one of those well, you'll be fine. Like somebody, but it's probably easier if you're just like, I really want to go work at Blizzard, and Blizzard uses Maya. I'm not saying they do, but like if that's what they do, then don't go learn Max. I mean, if that's really where you want to go, like you really want, like that's what my whole life is. I want to work at Blizzard.
Right.
I'm not going to learn this. It's like, but just and just going to see what types of software they're using. Like, and you could see all that. People list what kind of softwares they use on their piece. I mean, I do this. I still do this. Like, I go and look and like, what did they use to texture that? How did they render that? And just going to see what softwares people are using.
Sure. Yeah, I do that all the time, and it's great that there is, for the most part, a very open aspect to that in the community online today. What's your opinion on, let's say there's somebody listening here who doesn't have the luxury of gaining access to like a student license of something, and those are cost prohibitive. Let's say the student has access to something like SketchUp or Blender or something like that. should he or she, is there any merit to learning one of those tools that they have access to really well, just to build a portfolio?
I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, if you, yeah, I completely remember those days. Yeah, I mean, Blender, I mean, I can't stand their interface, but I mean, it's a really powerful tool. And if you can do really good work in Blender, then people will work with you. You know, here's the thing is like, you can really do whatever you want. I mean, but if you go that route and you become the Blender guy, like your work's gonna have to be really good. Because that means that when they hire you, they're going to have to teach you how to use Max, you know, or Maya or whatever it is. And studios will do that, but you're going to be going up against other people. So if they have somebody else who has the same kind of work that you have, and they use the software that they want them to use, then they're going to pick that person.
Makes sense.
So that's going to happen every time. So if you do go that route, you're just putting more pressure on yourself. You know, yeah, it is possible, and I do understand that. Yeah, I do understand that. But yeah, you're definitely putting a little more pressure on yourself.
Cool. And then the other question. Oh no, you got me thinking about that too much. I might that one might have slipped away. But oh man, what was I going to ask you? It was the software, and then it was nope, not going to remember. That's all right.
Well, I can add in one other thing. Actually, I just realized I was going to say before.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the other thing I was going to add on, and it slipped my mind, is on top of like looking at as far as you know, people who want to get a job, looking at people's work, not just for the software, but also if you can find people's work at the studios that you want to work for, and figure it, and it's a good way to see a quality bar. So if you really say that you want to work somewhere, like this is the other part that's always surprised me. People say, I really want to work here. I really want to work there. And, you know, it's like, well, have you ever gone and looked at like people who were employed at that company to see what kind of work they produce? And it's like, you know, no, I've never looked at it. Like, you really should, because none of your work looks like their work. And, you know, it might seem there's nothing wrong, especially in the beginning, like when you're really just trying to get a job. Like you don't have to make your grand statement on the world, you know, about like who you are as an artist. You know, there's nothing wrong with just going and looking at people's work and just being like, okay, they seem to like people who can model this, or who can texture like this, or do shaders like this. You know, I'm gonna do that too. You know, it's just smart.
It makes sense.
Sorry, that was the other.
No, that's dead on. I mean, it's like, yeah, if you want to become a cog in their machine, not again, like that's kind of what you need to do. Like you need to be a team player. You need to help this big machine run and do the things it does. To walk in there and naively just kind of turn a blind eye to like what the people who are there are producing does seem kind of silly. That disconnect would not be lost on them when they interview you, and like you said, that's kind of working against you really hard there at that point, I would think.
Well, and also like whoever's looking at the artwork that comes in seems to like this kind of work, you know. Like, so
sure,
you
that would make sense.
That's the other part of it too. It's like, but
yeah. And then right, exactly. So. The other question I was going to ask you earlier that I had forgotten was, again, I understand can be pretty subjective, but like for that person who's trying to get this job, they're working on building a portfolio, you know, and what if they say like, you know, like how much time should I be spending on this? I'll let you interpret that as you may, not, you know, whether you'd rather speak to like building a portfolio or just like what's do you have an hour count that you're logging in software per week or something like that?
It's hard to say. I mean, I mean, I worked a lot. I mean, uh, maybe even too much. I mean, I still might work too much, but I don't know if there's an hour count. I think the big thing is, and this is something I battle with all the time, but I know I did a really bad job of it when I was starting out, was just making sure that you're working intelligently, that like you're not just butting your head against something, and it ends up taking you like 6 hours to do something stupid because you wouldn't stop to, I'm just using example, go model out a little kit, take a time out and go model a little kit that would help you, build this thing instead of doing all this custom work. I'm just trying to think of like an example.
Or maybe if you're trying to build something and you've started and you've sunk, it's like the lost, what is that called? The lost time fallacy or sunk time fallacy or something, where you've put so much work into something, you just get more frustrated at it that you keep brute forcing through it rather than taking a break and acknowledging if and when you might need to cut your losses because there's a faster way to do it, even if that means starting over.
Yes, exactly. No, I mean that happens. I still do that. Like it'll be like late at night, and I'm like working on something at home, and I'm like, I just want to finish this thing. I just want to finish it, then I can go to sleep. And then like I spend all this time like working on this thing, and then as soon as I wake up the next morning, I'm like, oh, it's so dumb. I should have just done this.
Yep.
And then I do it, and it takes like 5 seconds, and it was like, I should have just gone to bed. I should have just gone to bed. That was just like wasted time. Now I'm tired. Like that kind of stuff,
And that really, I think that really does just come from. That just takes time. I really think that you kind of have to grow into that. That's kind of a level of maturity that, like, I feel like that was like the thing that like I wish I could have had when I was still in college or younger in general. But like, yeah, it takes a long time to get that gain that perspective. And I guess luckily now you're at least in a position where you've been doing this for a while. Hopefully, you probably can see those and spot those much better, much quicker.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully. I mean, I guess, like, I know when I was younger and starting out, and like, I don't know. I mean, it's hard, I mean, it's really, believing in yourself enough, that you can do something. It's sort of crazy that any of us do it, like in the face of all odds, that we're like, I'm sure I can do this thing, and you like just keep like sort of failing, progressing, but failing at the same time.
Failing forward.
Yeah, exactly. And there's just that for any of us that we persevere through that. I mean, it's just sort of amazing. But I know that was something that I and maybe it is. Maybe it's just something that everybody does. But I really felt like I wasted a lot of time, and I still feel like that's something. I mean, that's still something I fight with all the time. Like where it's just like, is this the dumbest thing I could possibly be doing? It's like it might be the dumbest thing. And I was like, should I stop? Especially if I'm working on stuff like, well, it can be if I'm in production and you're like, I need to get this done by now, or by then, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if I have time to take the break to think about this and see if I can, come up with this thing. Like fighting that urge, where it's just like, no, just take a break. Just, it's better to take the break. Like, even if you decide like, no, I don't have time to invest in that. I'm going to go and do the stupid thing that I already started doing, but it's good to take that time, and to not get too, down on yourself. I don't know if everybody goes, I know everybody goes through it in some ways, but like, I know I really beat myself up a lot, when I was starting out. It's just, I don't know. It's just hard. It's hard to like, look at stuff that you spend all that time on and be like, wow, that's just terrible.
It's all part of the journey.
Yep.
I suppose. I mean, anyone who's got a creative bone in their body, that they feel that a lot. I would think.
Yeah, I think
Um,
so.
would you say in general the quality or how would you comment on the question of the very general question of like what is the standard lifestyle or quality of life for somebody in your type of role based on your own experience, like in this field?
It really depends from studio to studio. Uh, and it's hard to say, some of the stuff even that I hear, I don't know if it's actually like hearsay or not, but
Got it.
I do know though that certain studios definitely you work a lot. And it's not just like, like we had like sprints, where it's like a couple weeks, and you have to work a good bit of time. But at Red Storm, especially, like I've always felt like, I mean, as long as I've been there, it's we've had periods of overtime, periods of, but it's been a very flexible and I have a family, so it's been very like family friendly. Understanding that I need to like take my kids to the doctor, I need to take them to school, stuff, whatever, that kind of stuff. Like it's been very flexible. And for the most part, at all the places that I've worked, that's been the case. There were some longer periods of crunch, but I never worked anywhere. Like I know that there are places that I won't name that definitely expect you to work a lot, like a lot.
People basically go there to get the name on their resume and they just burn out basically, and they kind of stick it in there as long as they can, but it's not usually sustainable.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some people do stay at those places. I'm not 100% sure how that works. Because yeah, I mean, like I work a lot. I mean, like between like my work and then my personal work, but it's different because it's like split, like I get to come home and hang out with my family and stuff. And then I go and do like my personal work at night. But it's different. That stuff's all mine. I don't have the pressure on me like, you do it at a job. So even though it's a lot of hours, it just isn't, it's not the same. But like working like, 12, 16-hour days, like for long stretches. I mean, I do not see how that's productive. Not like at a job. Like it's working those kind of hours. Like it's just, at least for me, I get dumb. I really do. Like every time I've done that, like there's just a limit. Like after a couple weeks, it's just like, I am pretty sure everything I'm doing right now is totally worthless.
Oh yeah. It's like, it's the whole thing. Like if you're sleep deprived and you're driving, it's akin to being drunk. Like they've done studies on that. And it's like the same thing goes for like, it doesn't matter what you're doing, that cognitive function goes down. And, being creative, is a very non-essential survival skill. Right. So that's like some of the first stuff to go. It's non-vital. And so, my friend, I've definitely heard some interesting studies done there, from some people I know, but, it's good to recognize that. And it's good to hear that it sounds like Red Storm does a very good job of allowing their employees to have some balance. I know within the creative fields, it can be all over the place. Some places are definitely demanding, and I've heard, as far as you're talking, entertainment industry, like movies, I've heard that's just can be pretty intense too. So
yeah.
That's awesome. It sounds like you're in a good spot right now.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, I mean, you've shared a lot of stuff. I apologize because this maybe ran a little bit longer than I told you it would. But we can wrap up. I mean, you've shared a lot of good stuff. I think, now anyone who's listened and maybe hopefully has considered this type of a future in doing something like what you do, they've got a good idea of kind of what they could expect and, what they could do to start heading in that direction at least. And, cool. Kind of just you sharing your story, I think helps a lot. You've been there, you've seen a number of things. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in there. I really appreciate you sharing your time with us.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, hope there is some stuff in there. I hope it's not too much rambling. Yeah.
No. It's all good, man. Like, so if people want to see your work, and be able to connect with you online, where should they go?
Well, I have a website through ArtStation, and it's just Schultz David. So instead of David Schultz, it's just flipped .com. But yeah, you can also find me on ArtStation. You can find me on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. If you have any questions, I mean, I accept pretty much everybody's Facebook request, as long as you're not naked in your picture. That's pretty much seems to be where it's like, I don't think you're a real person.
You got to draw the line somewhere, I guess.
Yeah. But in general, yeah, I'm happy to talk to people if they have questions. I try to get back to everybody. But yeah.
Cool. So you guys heard it from David himself. I will make sure to link up all of his profiles in the show notes, and you'll be able to get that at cgipodcast.com/episode/6. And anyone who's still got their naked profile pictures, go ahead and change those out. So David will accept your friend connection to start with, at least, and then you guys can deal with that later.
Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, reach out to David. He's a super nice guy. He's got lots of wisdom to share. Thank you for your time, David. Take care.
Oh, thank you.
There you have it, episode 6 with David Schultz, the environment artist from Red Storm Entertainment. Well, David touched on a bunch of really cool stuff, so if any of you out there are considering a future in the video game industry, or maybe even specifically an environment artist, you should definitely go ahead and take David's advice and start working toward that today. And if you need to get in touch with him, you can definitely do so on the linked up social media that I'll have on the show notes. And finally, if you don't mind heading on over to iTunes to subscribe to this podcast, leave a rating and a review. That would be most appreciated. And until next time, this is Will Gibbons signing off.